Right now, tonight, there is a version of you 1 year from now already taking shape, and you have no idea which version it's going to be. Most people assume the next 12 months will feel like a continuation of this one. A little older, a little more tired, roughly the same shape of life with the volume turned up or down slightly. That assumption is almost always wrong, and it's wrong in a very specific way. The next year of your life is not going to be decided by anything dramatic. It is not waiting on a new job, a health scare, a windfall, or some external event to rearrange everything. It is going to be decided by about 10 small choices, repeated or avoided, thousands of times, in moments so ordinary you'll barely notice them happening. This is Master Your Life, and today we're going through exactly what those 10 decisions are, one at a time, in enough detail that you can start using them before you even finish watching. Here's why this matters more than almost anything else you'll hear this year. Most people spend their energy managing the big moments, the once-a-decade decisions, while the actual architecture of their life gets built entirely out of small, repeated choices they're making on autopilot. You already know this if you're honest with yourself. Think about where you were exactly 1 year ago today. Chances are, if nothing dramatic happened to you, your habits are close to identical. Your relationships occupy roughly the same depth. Your evenings get spent the same way. And your bank account tells a familiar story. That's not bad luck. That's the compounding result of small decisions you didn't realize you were making. Or more accurately, small decisions you let default settings make for you. Here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you a little. Every day you don't decide deliberately. Something else decides for you. Your habits decide. Your phone decides. The loudest person in the room decides. And whatever decided today will very likely decide again tomorrow and the day after, until a year has quietly passed and you're standing in almost the same spot, wondering where the time went. If you've ever felt that low hum of, I know I could be doing more with this life, that feeling isn't wrong, and it isn't vague either. It has a precise cause, and today it gets a precise fix. If any part of what I just said landed for you, do me a favor and drop a comment letting me know which decision on this list you think you've been avoiding the longest. I read every single one, and I promise you're not the only person who's going to recognize themselves today. Before I walk you through the first decision, I want you to understand something that changes how you'll hear everything that follows, something almost nobody talks about when they give advice like this. And once you understand it, you won't be able to unsee it in your own life. Here's that thing. The 10 decisions I'm about to give you are not equally hard. Some of them you'll be able to install by tomorrow morning without any friction at all. Others are going to feel uncomfortable the first several times you attempt them. And that discomfort is not a sign you're doing it wrong. It's a sign the decision is actually worth something. Anything that reshapes a year of your life is going to ask something of you in the beginning. That's the trade. Small effort now, compounded, for a different life later. Keep that in mind as we go, because a few of these are going to be far easier to nod along with than to actually practice. And the gap between nodding and practicing is exactly where most people's next year quietly slips away from them again. I also want to be honest about something most videos like this skip over entirely. None of these 10 decisions require you to change careers, move cities, end a relationship, or blow up any part of your existing life. That's actually the point. If reshaping your year required upheaval on that scale, almost nobody would ever actually do it, because upheaval is expensive, risky, and slow to arrange. These decisions work precisely because they're small enough to start tonight, with nothing you don't already have. No new resources, no permission from anyone else, no perfect circumstances you're waiting for. Just a willingness to choose differently the next several hundred times a familiar situation shows up in your. Let's start with the first decision, and it's one that will save you more hours and more peace of mind than almost anything else on this list. Decide today that you will stop absorbing conflict that isn't yours. This sounds obvious when you hear it stated plainly, but watch how it actually plays out in your week. A coworker vents to you about a dispute you have no stake in, and somehow by the end of the conversation, you're carrying their frustration home with you. A family member drags you into a disagreement between two other people, asking you to weigh in, to pick a side, to referee something you never signed up for. A friend replays an argument they had with someone else, and you spend the next hour mentally rehearsing what you would have said, as if it were your fight. None of this is an accident, and none of it is truly required of you. Conflict spreads because it's built to spread. It needs an audience, a validator, someone to confirm that the anger or hurt is justified. You are, without realizing it, being recruited into other people's storms on a near-daily basis. And every time you accept the recruitment, you pay for it with attention and calm you'll never get back. The fix is not coldness. It's a boundary stated with warmth. You can hear someone out, tell them honestly that their feelings make sense, and still decline to carry the dispute forward as your own. Something as simple as, "That sounds really frustrating. I hope it works out," closes the loop without cutting the person off. Try this for even 1 week and pay attention to how much lighter your evenings feel. Over a full year, the amount of mental bandwidth you reclaim by refusing to absorb conflict that was never yours is enormous. And that bandwidth doesn't just disappear. It goes somewhere. It goes into your actual work, your actual relationships, the parts of your life that were starving for attention while you were busy managing other people's fires. The second decision follows naturally from the first, and it concerns money, though not in the way most financial advice talks about it. Decide that before any purchase above a number you set for yourself, pick something that stings a little, $50, $100, whatever makes you pause. You'll ask a single question. Will the version of me a decade from now respect this? Not enjoy it. Not want it in the moment. Respect it, the way you respect a choice that held up over time. This one question, asked consistently, does something most budgeting advice fails to do. Because it isn't about restriction. It's about representation. Right now, nearly every spending decision you make is being made exclusively by the version of you that exists in this exact second. The one who's tired or bored or wants a small hit of pleasure right now. That version of you is not malicious, but it's also not the only stakeholder in your financial life. And it's rarely thinking about who you're trying to become. Bringing your future self into the room, even for 10 seconds, changes the outcome of a surprising number of decisions. Some purchases will pass easily. A few will fail, obviously, the moment you actually ask. And a good number will land in between, which is exactly where you want them. Because uncertainty is your cue to wait a day or two and see if the desire survives contact with time. That's it. That's the entire practice. And here's something I did not expect the first time I heard someone describe running this for a full year. They told me the strange part wasn't how much money they saved. It was how much calmer their relationship with money became. Because every purchase now felt chosen instead of triggered. There's a version of this second decision that applies just as much to how you spend your time as it does to money. And it's worth sitting with for a second before we move on. Every hour has an opportunity, costs the same way every dollar does. And most people never run the future self question on their calendar, only on their wallet. An evening spent one way is an evening that can never be spent another way. And yet very few people ever pause, even briefly, to ask whether the way they're about to spend the next few hours is one their future self would look back on and respect. You don't need to run this question on every hour of your day. That would be exhausting and unnecessary. But on the discretionary hours, the ones where you genuinely have a choice about how to fill them, the same 10-second pause that protects your bank account can just as easily protect your time. And over a year, protected time turns out to matter even more than protected money. But the two decisions I've given you so far, as useful as they are really just clearing space. Space that has to be filled with something, or it goes right back to where it started. And what fills that space is where the next part of this gets genuinely different from anything. Here's the third decision. And it's the one that determines whether the space you just reclaimed from drama and impulsive spending actually turns into something meaningful or just gets swallowed by scrolling and low-grade distraction instead. Choose one single relationship, right now, tonight, and decide it gets your deliberate attention for the next year. Not your family in general, not your friend group as a category, one specific person. Here's what almost nobody tells you about adult relationships. The wide, shallow network most of us maintain, dozens of people we're in light contact with, feels like richness. But it functions like a kind of quiet poverty, because none of those connections ever get deep enough to actually hold weight when life gets hard. Depth requires focus, and focus is something you can only give to a small handful of people, realistically 1 or 2 at a time. So pick tonight. Maybe it's a parent you've drifted from without ever meaning to. Maybe it's an old friend whose calls you've been letting go to voicemail longer than you'd like to admit. Maybe it's a partner you love deeply but haven't actually talked to, beneath the logistics of daily life, in longer than you can remember. Whoever it is, the decision is to show up for that one relationship in ways that go slightly beyond your comfort. Call when you'd normally text. Ask the question that goes a layer deeper than small talk. Stay in the harder conversation instead of steering back to something easier. None of this needs to be dramatic. It needs to be consistent. A year of consistent small investment in one relationship produces a depth that years of scattered attention across 20 relationships never will. And the remarkable thing is that once that depth is built, it tends to hold long after the deliberate year of focus has ended. The fourth decision is smaller in each individual instance, but massive in its cumulative weight. Stop performing in conversations and let yourself actually show up as you are. Most adult conversation runs on a kind of quiet performance. The impressive version of yourself, the composed version, the version that has it together and always knows what to say. That performance is exhausting to maintain. And worse, it keeps every conversation you're in from ever reaching anywhere real, because the other person is very likely performing right back at you. And two performances talking to each other produce nothing but polished emptiness. The decision here is to drop it, on purpose, in small doses at first. Admit when you don't know something instead of bluffing past it. Let an awkward silence sit instead of rushing to fill it with something clever. Say the slightly less polished, more honest version of what you actually think. This will feel exposed the first several times you try it. That's normal, and it's exactly the discomfort I warned you about earlier. Stay with it anyway. What happens on the other side of dropping the performance is that your conversations start to change shape entirely. The shallow ones stay shallow, sure, but the real ones, the ones with people who are also quietly craving something honest, start happening more often. And those are the conversations that actually leave you feeling fed instead of drained. One thing worth naming honestly here, dropping the performance does not mean oversharing with everyone you meet, and it doesn't mean abandoning tact or context. There's a difference between authenticity and indiscretion, and the decision isn't asking you to confess your deepest struggles to a checkout clerk. It's asking you to stop the smaller, constant performance. The reflexive, I'm fine when you're not. The manufactured enthusiasm. The carefully curated version of your week you give people who actually just wanted to know how you're really doing. Start there, with the people who've earned a real answer, and let the practice grow outward from that foundation at whatever pace feels honest to you. If this is landing for you right now, if you're already thinking about a conversation you've been performing your way through for years, that's worth sitting with. Because we're about to get into the decision that reveals why so many people never actually solve the problems that have been quietly running their lives. And once you hear it, you'll understand exactly what's been missing. Decision 5 is deceptively simple, and it's the one that unlocks nearly everything else on this list. Whenever you're wrestling with a real problem, a decision you can't settle, a tangle of feelings you can't name, a situation that keeps looping in your head, write about it for 10 minutes instead of just thinking about it. This sounds almost too basic to matter, but here's the actual mechanism behind why it works. Your mind is excellent at noticing that something is wrong and terrible at organizing what to do about it. Left alone, it runs the same handful of considerations in circles, again and again, mistaking repetition for progress. Writing breaks the loop, because it forces you to choose specific words, and choosing specific words forces a structure onto the problem that pure thinking never provides. People who try this for the first time are consistently surprised. Not that it helps, but by how much it helps. How 10 honest minutes with a notebook can surface a clarity that hours of circular worrying never touched. This isn't journaling in the vague, diary sense. It's targeted. You sit down, you name the specific thing you're stuck on, and you write your way through it without editing yourself. Install this as your default response to feeling stuck. And over a year, you'll have written your way through dozens of situations that would otherwise have just sat in your chest, unresolved, quietly draining you. If any part of this has helped, you see something in your own life a little differently already. This is a good moment to hit like on this video, and send it to someone in your life who's been carrying a decision they can't seem to settle. Sometimes the most useful thing you can hand someone isn't advice. It's a way of thinking that actually works. Decision 6 is the one people resist the most when they first hear it. And it's also the one that tends to change the most about how others experience you. Be the first person in the room willing to name the tension everyone else is pretending not to notice. Nearly every room you walk into, family, dinners, work meetings, tense conversations between two people, has something unspoken sitting in it, some obvious discomfort that everyone can feel and nobody addresses, because addressing it requires being the one to go first. I think about a man I once knew, competent, well-liked, and quietly stuck in his career and his relationships for years, without ever quite understanding why. What we eventually noticed together was that in every room where something needed to be said, he waited for someone else to say it. And usually, nobody did. So the tension just stayed. And every relationship connected to that tension stayed a little shallower than it could have been. I asked him to try one thing for a year. The next time he noticed unspoken tension in a room, he would be the one to name it, gently, with curiosity rather than confrontation. Something as simple as, I think there's something here we're not quite talking about. Is it worth getting into? The first few times terrified him. He told me later he felt presumptuous, like he was overstepping some invisible rule everyone else was respecting. He did it anyway, and the rooms he walked into started changing. Tension named almost always resolves faster than tension avoided. People started bringing him their harder conversations because they'd learned he was someone who would actually engage with them instead of deflecting. His career moved that year. His relationships deepened. None of it came from a new skill. It came from one decision, repeated, every time the moment called for it. What made the difference wasn't a single dramatic conversation. It was that he kept choosing to go first, week after week, in ordinary rooms, until it stopped being a decision at all and simply became how he moved through the world. That's the pattern behind nearly everything on this list. The discomfort is loudest in the first few attempts and quietest by the 20th, which is exactly why the people who stop after 1 or 2 tries never get to see what the practice actually becomes over time. And what's coming next is arguably the most important shift on this entire list, the one that determines whether everything you've heard so far actually compounds into something real or quietly fades the way most good advice does within a week of hearing it. Decision 7 addresses something almost everyone is quietly carrying and almost nobody deals with on purpose. Every week, pick one specific call, message, or conversation you've been avoiding and have it. Not eventually. That week. Most adults are walking around with a backlog of unresolved small obligations. The relative they've been meaning to reach out to, the difficult conversation they've been postponing, the unresolved issue sitting at the bottom of a to-do list for months. Individually, each one feels minor enough to put off. Collectively, they create a low, persistent background hum of unease that never fully goes away, because some part of you always knows the list exists, even when you're not actively thinking about it. The fix is almost embarrassingly simple. Once a week, pick one item from that backlog and clear it. You don't need to rehearse it for an hour or wait for the perfect moment. You make the call. You send the message. You have the conversation, imperfectly if necessary, and you move on. Do this every week for a year, and you will have cleared over 50 things that had been quietly weighing on you, most of which turn out to be far less difficult in reality than they were in your imagination. What's left afterward isn't just an empty to-do list. It's a version of you who has practiced doing hard things on a schedule instead of avoiding them indefinitely. And that capacity carries into everything else you do. Decision 8 is about what goes into your mind in the final half hour before sleep, because that half hour matters more than almost anyone realizes. Most people end their day with the lowest effort input available. Passive scrolling, background television, something that asks nothing of the mind and gives almost nothing back. Then sleep happens on top of that state, which is part of why so many people wake up feeling like they never actually rested, even after 8 full hours. The decision is to swap that final half hour, just the last one, for reading. A real book, any subject, fiction or otherwise, it matters far less than the consistency. The brain goes into sleep, having been fed something with structure and language instead of something designed purely to hold attention, and the difference shows up quickly in how you sleep and in the mental state you wake into. Run this for a year, and you'll have read somewhere close to 20 books you otherwise never would have touched, and that input, quietly and without any dramatic single moment, will have changed the shape of how you think. This is one of the cheapest decisions on the entire list. It costs you nothing but a slightly earlier decision to put the phone down. And the return on it compounds for the rest of your life, long after the year is over. Decision 9 might be the one that surprises you the most, because it isn't about what you do. It's about who you ask. Once a month, choose one person who is further along than you in something that actually matters to you, and ask them one specific, well-considered question. Most adults quietly stop asking for guidance somewhere in their 30s or 40s, not because they've run out of things to learn, but because asking starts to feel like admitting they should already know. Meanwhile, the person who could answer their exact question, sometimes someone they already know and see regularly, is never asked, and would very likely be glad to help if only they were given the chance. The question has to be specific. Not what should I do with my life, but something narrow enough that a real answer is possible, like how they navigated a particular fork in the road when they were exactly where you are now. Send it once a month to a different person if you like, and let the answers accumulate. 12 genuine, specific answers from 12 people ahead of you is a kind of compressed wisdom you could not generate on your own in years. And there's a version of you 12 months from now who is measurably further ahead because you were finally willing to ask. What's easy to miss about this particular decision is how much it changes the relationship itself, not just the information you receive. Most people underestimate how flattering it is to be asked a thoughtful, specific question by someone who clearly respects your experience. The mentors and senior figures in your life are not annoyed by good questions. They remember them, and they remember who asked them. A year of monthly questions doesn't just leave you with 12 answers. It leaves you with 12 relationships that are measurably warmer than they were before you started, simply because you gave someone the chance to be useful to you in a specific, meaningful way. There is one final decision left, and it's the one that ties every single thing you've just heard together into something that actually holds. And once I tell you what it is, you'll understand exactly why it had to come last. Decision 10 is this. At the end of every single day, before you go to sleep, name one specific thing from that day you're genuinely proud of. Not grateful for, proud of. Gratitude looks outward at what happened to you or around you. Pride looks at what you actually did, the choices you made on purpose in the middle of an ordinary day. This might sound like the smallest decision on the entire list, and in a sense it is, but it's also the one that makes all 9 before it actually stick, because it turns the other decisions into something you notice yourself doing, rather than something that quietly happens and disappears into the background of a busy life. When you name what you're proud of at the end of the day, I stayed out of that argument that wasn't mine. I made that call I'd been avoiding. I read instead of scrolling. You're not just reflecting. You're reinforcing the exact behavior you want to keep. And on the days when you slipped back into old patterns, this same practice gives you an honest, low-drama way to notice that too, without spiraling into self-criticism, just a clear-eyed acknowledgement that tomorrow is another chance to choose differently. There's a quiet reason this particular decision has to close the list rather than open it. Everything before it, declining other people's drama, questioning your spending, investing in one relationship, dropping the performance, writing through your problems, naming the tension in the room, clearing your backlog of hard calls, reading before bed, asking better questions of better people. All of it depends on you actually noticing when you've done it. Without a nightly habit of naming what you're proud of, even a perfectly run year of good decisions can pass by half invisible, absorbed into the background the way most of life is. This last decision is what makes the other 9 visible to you while they're happening, instead of something you only recognize in hindsight, if you recognize them at all. Here's the single most important thing I want you to walk away with today. You do not need to install all 10 of these decisions tomorrow morning. And honestly, trying to would probably guarantee that none of them stick. Pick the 3 that hit hardest while you were listening. The 3 that made you think of a specific person, a specific evening, a specific version of a conversation you've been avoiding. Start with those 3 tomorrow. Run them for a month until they stop requiring effort and start feeling like simply who you are. Then add 3 more. By the end of 2 months, you'll have 6 running quietly in the background of your life. By the end of 3 months, all 10. The integration is gradual on purpose, because gradual is what actually lasts, unlike the dramatic New Year overhaul that burns out by February every single time. Here's the truth underneath everything I've told you today. The next 12 months of your life are going to be shaped either way. That shaping is happening whether you participate in it or not. The only real question, the one that actually decides which direction your year moves, is whether you're the one doing the shaping or whether you're letting the same defaults that ran last year run again on repeat. A year from now, there will be a version of you that the person watching this video right now cannot fully picture yet. Whether that version is meaningfully different, calmer, closer to the people who matter, lighter under the weight of things finally addressed, comes down to nothing more dramatic than the small decisions you start making tonight and keep making, quietly, in the ordinary moments that make up an ordinary week. This is Master Your Life. And if this gave you even one decision worth starting tomorrow, subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next video walks through exactly how to keep any one of these 10 decisions from quietly fading out the way most good intentions do. And that part matters just as much as the decisions themselves.